What you saw in Washington was one man who was already under an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court, Benjamin Netanyahu, and another man who effectively put himself in the position, although it won't happen, of facing an arrest warrant, Donald Trump.
So, Scott, Trump has delayed tariffs on Mexico and Canada.
No.
Why do you think he's done that?
Because Donald Trump backed down over his tariff threat. Now, every Trumpist out there is going to hit your YouTube channel because of that sentence. And I know that, so I better explain what happened here. Trump's tactic, first of all, he did it as a businessman, he did it as a politician, and that is he tries to bully and intimidate. And it's a negotiating tactic. I mean, that part is true. So it's not necessarily the case that Trump was going to slap 25% tariffs on at the end of Canada and Mexico, but he wants them to make concessions to him. So he looks like the winner. We saw that during Trump's first term. We are seeing it with China as well. What is interesting is the way that this played out, because of the way that countries have learned how you deal with Trump. So we got to the Monday, and we were facing the deadline was going to come in. And first of all, Claudia Sheinbaum, who is the president of Mexico. And there's an important bit of background here. When Trump was making all his threats about migrants, if you don't take migrants, we're going to slap sanctions on you. We're going to punish you. We're going to come after you. Sheinbaum told him last November, that's not going to work. We're not going to be intimidated. And he backed off. He actually backed off of in going after her, and he went after Canada instead. Anyway, Sheinbaum on Monday comes out, and having taken a very tough stand with her domestic population, then she and Trump talk on the phone. Now, what she does is she doesn't completely go studs up against him, right? We're not going to have a confrontation. What she does is she makes a token gesture. And the token gesture is, we'll send some National Guard up to the border, right? To patrol the migrant flows, et cetera. The same thing that Mexico did in 2021 at the start of the Biden administration. The exact same thing that took place. But Trump has got something shiny. Now, they're sending National Guard to the border, so he can remove the threat for 30 days and say, look, this is what I've achieved. But the Mexicans really have made no concessions in terms of what's taken place, okay? Then there's the Canadians. And of course, Donald Trump hates Justin Trudeau. He's hated him for years. But Trudeau gets on the phone with him and he says, we're devoting, I think, $1.3 billion to border security. We're talking about personnel. We're talking about technology, advanced technology. And I'm going to name a fentanyl czar. Now, that's kind of meaningless. Only 19 kilograms of fentanyl crossed from Canada to the US in 2024. But the word fentanyl czar, this goes back to the 1980s drug czar and the Reagan administration. Ooh, that's a really important position. And Trump goes out and says, look, big victory. The Canadians had announced all of the steps, except for the fentanyl czar. They had announced everything else on border security on December 17th. They'd already made the commitments. So yeah, what you had a bit of theater. Trump was trying to act tough. He was trying to get some concessions and bully, and Canada and Mexico stood their ground.
Do you think part of it as well was that he was a bit spooked by the global markets and their reaction? Like he's a man that doesn't like to be, unpopular, and that kind of changed things a bit.
I think there were multiple things that came into play on that Monday, which is interesting. And of course, everybody is watching the markets. And of course, the markets start on Sunday, American time. It started in Asia because of the threat on tariffs on China as well. And I think the Nikkei in Japan was down 2%. South Korean index was down around about 2%. So you can just see the wave of the markets. You can see Europe where the market changes would take place. And then you watch the US markets. It wasn't just that the US markets were down 2%. Technology stocks took a big hit on Monday because the idea being if there's going to be a big US-China scrap, if it's going to be affecting raw materials as well from other parts, technology is going to be affected. And of course, technology stocks are what has been driving the US stock market for several years. And of course, Elon Musk, the unelected co-president of the United States, has a big investment in Tesla, which is part of those big seven, the magnificent seven of stocks that we're talking about. So yeah, I think the markets had a play in it, and I think I'm not sure. Trump always looks at headlines on markets, but his advisors also would have looked at what's behind the headlines on markets, which is in terms of how the financial sector is reacting. And J.P. Morgan came out and said this administration is not business friendly. That's a pretty big warning shot that's fired from one of America's biggest financial institutions. So I think all of this was in play there. And so what Trump does, of course, is he kicks the can down the road for 30 days because he can't back out completely. He can't say, oh, that's it, I'm not going to impose tariffs at all. What we now have to see is over the next 30 days, are we going to have serious trade talks? What shape do they take place? Are they overtaken by Trump going off on another thought bubble? Which means that even though we're out of the immediate woods on terms of what would have affected not just Canada, Mexico, it would have affected Europe, it would have affected the UK, we still have the uncertainty. We still have the business investment uncertainty, over whether something's going to happen in the next month that's going to bring us back to, again, another throat confrontation, which is, in a lose-lose situation because no one wins in a tariff war. That's the headline.
I mean, now we have the tariffs with China and this kind of looming threat of a full-on trade war. Do you think that he would backtrack on that as well? I mean, I think a lot of people would have thought that maybe having Elon Musk, kind of adjacent to the White House or in the White House, whatever you want to call it, maybe one positive part of it would be that he does have these, links with China and his work with Tesla, that he might have been able to help those relationships. And behind Trump at the inauguration was all of these tech bosses, and they're kind of the most impacted by the tariffs. You kind of would have thought that they might have been in his ear a little bit more saying, like, this isn't going to work.
Well, Trump had already stepped back a bit, even on the China tariffs line, because remember, he was talking about 60% during the campaign, and in the end, he goes with 10. That's still significant. I mean, that's still, given the size of the U.S.-China trading relationship, you're talking about many billions of dollars that are going to be affected. But China would have been preparing for this. And so what was interesting is that China, within minutes, comes back out and says, all right, we're going to retaliate on American vehicles. We're going to retaliate on other American sectors. They slapped 2 American companies on their naughty list. But what was interesting out of all that is that the one company they then said they're going to investigate was Google. Now, of course, Google's a rival to Elon Musk in the IT sector. So China's playing it both ways in that they're going to say we're not going to be pushed around, but they're leaving the door open for maneuvers as well. And of course, everybody started flagging up the fact that Trump's going to talk to Xi Jinping. And Trump loves Xi Jinping. Trump wants to be an autocrat like Xi Jinping. So that kind of comes into the play with it here. And once again, we're going to get into an idea of what happens in the next 30 days, which was exactly what happened during Trump's first term, is that he would come out and impose tariffs, in this case, by social media, just, an announcement. And then everybody would start to calibrate and bring it on. Now, China's biggest challenge right now is internal. China's got big internal issues economically. We've known that for years. The tariffs don't help that, but they're not like a breaking point. So China will assess, they'll make their play. But I think the interesting thing to watch is that China will not just maneuver with the U.S., they'll maneuver with other countries. So their play with other countries is going to be, the U.S. is not a reliable trading partner. You see what they have done to their allies. And of course, Trump is threatening tariffs on the EU as well. Don't you think you should be looking to us for a stable trading relationship? So there's multiple pieces that Beijing are going to be looking at. Where Trump's focus is going to be, I don't know, because the other thing about this is we should be talking about these tariffs, but Trump's got a relatively short attention span and he jumps off onto other issues. So on Monday, we were talking tariffs. Here I am talking to you on a Wednesday, and the big story is his ethnic cleansing of Gaza, his whiz-bang proposal. So, whether he spends the next few days thinking about Israel, Gaza, or whether he gets back onto tariffs or whether he gets back onto something else. For example, completely breaking the U.S. government with an administrative coup. You know, there's nothing. I can't give you a coherent read on where tariffs are going to go at this point because there isn't coherence around Trump and around the administration.
Just before we go on to Gaza, I just wanted to ask the last thing on tariffs. Is this not just completely playing into Xi Jinping's hands, into his playbook? I mean, now he gets to turn around and go to bodies like BRICS and exactly what you said, go and trade with other bodies. It means the countries, even like the UK, might feel like they have to trade with, other bodies. Surely it's just going to have quite a detrimental impact on the US, which last time it had a really big impact on the agricultural sector. We're seeing things like, already USPS, they're not delivering some parcels coming from China and Hong Kong.
You're going to look, China is going to play this in multiple ways. I mean, the first thing is going to be that even though the tariffs are more limited now, that they just simply are on China rather than Canada and Mexico, it's still going to be an inflation spike, because you just slap 10% increase on cost on everything you're bringing in. When inflation goes up, well, that gives you less room to cut interest rates, which is what the Federal Reserve had been planning to do in 2025. When you don't cut interest rates, then the stock market will not bounce. That will tick off Trump even more. And what you're going to have is these series of economic effects that are going to absolutely undo his rhetoric, during the campaign. I'll make America great again economically, which we fully expected that this would happen, that economically things would fall apart. But tariffs aren't going to help it. And China's going to play upon that, right? Because China's going to play upon it to distract from their own economic issues. Look at what's happening in America. But then you're absolutely right that if you play this longer term, China, which is developed, has its own alternative economic system. It's got alternative currency, it's got alternative trading relationships, alternative financial relationships. But it will go into other countries and make the play, which is, your Western-led, your U.S.-led economic system. This just isn't stable now, which takes place. And also, they'll do it in terms of what we call soft power. They'll do it in terms of, look, who's the adult in the room here? Is it Trump or is it us? And when it comes to diplomacy, they're going to build upon that. And China's also going to be able to play upon other things that are going to take place. For example, the complete disorder now in the U.S. government, with entire agencies being shut down, with other agencies being paralyzed, with certain services that are going to be crippled, already being crippled, whether you're talking about healthcare, whether you're talking about providing basic payments regarding transport, whether you're talking about education, and Chinese media is already having a field day with the fact that Elon Musk is just tearing through the U.S. government like an autocrat, and expect more of that to come, because I don't see Musk backing down, and because Trump simply does not know how to work off of a win-win basis, if you want to put it this way. He always works off a win-lose basis, and China's going to turn that against him.
So moving on to the situation in Gaza, Trump met with Benjamin Netanyahu. He laid out his plans for the Middle East, and he said that he wants to take over Gaza and relocate Palestinians. What was your reaction to that press conference?
That's horrific. Oh, let me just speak as a human being, not as an analyst here. 2.3 million people live in Gaza. After Hamas's mass killing of Israel, they have endured 15 months of mass killing of their population by Israelis. And we're getting close to 50,000 who have been killed in Gaza since then. 90%, almost 90% of the population has been displaced. They've been thrown out of their homes. Some of them are now trying to return to their homes during phase 1 of the ceasefire, but a lot of them are returning to rubble. Health services absolutely decimated. Schools torn apart. There's no functioning economy, which is there now. So you have had a population which has gone through this suffering, and then rather than saying, we're going to try to continue the ceasefire, and we're going to lay out a plan for recovery to help those in this population, which, by the way, would be a good tactic to separate those people from Hamas. What you say here is they have to leave. Not that they want to leave, not that they're choosing to leave. They have to leave. And they have to go where? Egypt, which has said it doesn't want them. Jordan, which says it doesn't want them. Another unspecified country, the Gulf states, which say they don't want them. Nobody wants to be responsible for the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, of all Gazans. And this is what it is. It is ethnic cleansing. It should be called out for this. And I'm just going to put in a historical reminder as to why, which hasn't really been mentioned by folks. A lot of the current issues we deal with in 2025, which surrounds Israel and Palestinians, go back to 1948 and the creation of the State of Israel, because during that Israel-Arab war, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced, lost their homes. I think it's total around about 5 to 6 million descendants of those refugees effectively still are stateless in various countries around the Middle East. It's called the Nakba. Nobody wants a second Nakba in the region. Nobody, except maybe some in Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet. And what Donald Trump has done is he has effectively not just sanctioned ethnic cleansing, he's leading from the front, including up to the point of using U.S. troops to enforce it. And that's what's happened. But what is serious in terms of the immediate seriousness is the effects that this has. There will be no phase 2 of the Israel-Gaza ceasefire. Now, it was already going to be difficult because phase 1 ends in 3 weeks. And at that point, phase 2 is supposed to be a full Israeli withdrawal and talking about who's then going to govern Gaza. Now, Israel and the U.S. don't want Hamas to govern Gaza. Hamas would like to govern. In fact, they want to govern Gaza. But if you don't have Hamas there, someone else has to govern it, right? Now, when you say we are going to ethnically cleanse Gaza of all Gazans, there will be no Gaza government, none. That means no phase 2 ceasefire, and you have only 2 options at that point. You either have, and they too may coexist for a while, you either have a return to war, open-ended Israeli attacks, and or you have a indefinite military occupation by the Israelis, and possibly, if Trump has his way, by the Americans. That's where you are. And the talks for phase 2 were restarting in Doha, and Trump has completely swept that aside. Even if Benjamin Netanyahu, who is under pressure not to go into phase 1 by the hard right ministers in his cabinet, even if he didn't want it to have a phase 2, and I don't think he does, but even if he wanted to have a phase 2, he can't do it now. He can't do it now because the finance minister, Mr. Smotrich, supports the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. The former national security minister, Mr. Ben-Gvir, who left the cabinet because he objected to phase 1, but he still supports the government, he came out and has said, Trump's statement is absolutely right. This is the way we have to go. Even Benny Gantz, who resigned from Netanyahu's cabinet last May because he didn't agree with the open-ended war in Gaza, he said, well, Trump's idea is original and creative. Netanyahu has no space to pursue a phase 2 now. And again, I don't think he would have, but he has no space. So you will see the end to this ceasefire in a few weeks. And at that point, Donald Trump, who was supposedly, remember, the peacemaker, because the rhetoric was he helped bring about phase 1, he is all in on the side of the Israelis to do whatever needs to be done to get rid of all Gazans. I'm going to say this point blank, and look, you're out on YouTube, and you can decide whether or not to put it in or not, and so on. We have lived with the experience going back to the 20th century, and even before that, of ethnic cleansing of other groups. We've had ethnic cleansing of Armenians in World War I in Turkey. We've had ethnic cleansing of groups in Eastern Europe that took place. We had ethnic cleansing of Jewish people which took place. Part of the reason why the state of Israel was created was because of the ethnic cleansing of Jewish people. In 2025, having seen that experience of ethnic cleansing, which by the way took place in the Balkans in the 1990s as well, in 2025, for any politician to be talking about ethnic cleansing, given the experience of different religious groups, different ethnic groups in the past, should be called out as being against all principles of morality and against all international law. And it is tantamount to supporting crimes against humanity. I'm going to repeat. Ethnic cleansing of the population of Gaza is tantamount to a crime against humanity, which means that, in effect, what you saw in Washington was one man who was already under an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court, Benjamin Netanyahu, and another man who effectively put himself in the position, although it won't happen, of facing an arrest warrant, Donald Trump.
I appreciate your, we're running out of time a little bit, so I just want to ask you just a question on kind of Trump's decision-making on this. Axios reported that, not only did this send shockwaves through the Middle East and through the world, but in the White House itself. He kind of came up with this himself, apparently. He didn't speak to many people in the White House before this. A lot of members of the GOP didn't know until we were told, and everyone was a little bit confused by it. And upon Trump running for office, there was this idea that Trump was going to be quite isolationist, back out of Ukraine, back out of all of these conflicts. And now, it's another place that he wants to lay claim to on top of the Panama Canal, on top of Greenland, on top of Canada. And so we're almost seeing these kind of imperial ambitions from someone that we thought was quite isolationist. I mean, what do you think is behind this decision making?
When Trump was negotiating with Kim Jong-un in North Korea, he said, North Korea's got some prime coastland for development. His son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who was part of the first Trump administration, said that Gaza has got incredible waterfront property for development. Donald Trump, in his press conference yesterday, talked about the potential of Gaza for resorts where people from all countries could come to. He simply was talking as a businessman to depopulate the area and rebuild it, not for Gazans, but for people with a lot of money to come. That is exactly what took place. And I'm sorry, I'm not buying this. If you're in the Trump administration, you know that Donald Trump has talked like this. He's been talking like this. If you hadn't gone back years, he's been talking about it ever since the inauguration. I can go back and give you a statement on January 23rd where he said the same thing. So now I don't know whether the Trump administration people just simply won't put a leash on him, or whether they simply think, oh, well, he can say that, it's not really going to matter that much. The point here is that there will be some people in the media that will just pretend it's all normal. It's just Trump speaking off the cuff. And so, no big deal. Now, a lot of us in the media aren't, thank God, and talk about how serious it is. But I want to see today, all right, which Republicans are going to speak out against this? Nobody within the White House will, of course, because then Trump would fire them. Is Elon Musk going to call him out on X? I doubt it. So who's going to stand up? Who's going to have the bottle to come out and say, not only does the emperor have no clothes, the emperor is a convicted felon who is destructive, who has no regard for human life, and whose ideas are repugnant. Who's going to do that? And who in the Republican Party, if they say that, is going to be able to stay in the Republican Party? That's where we are.